there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial and business partner Corby McGordon. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building sellable or transferable business value, and then for planning your eventual exit from your business. We want to help you build a business that can be transferred or sold and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. Today, we're going to hear from a gentleman who has exited successfully with the implementation of an ESOP, or an employee stock ownership plan. Our topic is an ESOP exit, and our guest is Tim Rettig. Tim is a second-generation serial ESOP entrepreneur. He started InTrust IT in 1992 when he was at school at the University of Cincinnati. He then sold the company within 4 years, but stayed on board to run the division, actually, for the parent company that bought him. And then 11 years after he sold it, he bought the division back and continued to grow it as a company, winning a whole lot of awards, including being recognized as a best place to work in Cincinnati for a total of 14 years through the year 2025, which we just wrapped up. So he's been quite successful in building a company culture that has minimal employee turnover and maximum employee engagement. In 2019, Tim began transitioning his company to be an ESOP, or an employee stock ownership plan, just like his dad did, Jay Rettig did with his company, Software Solutions, in 2004. So there's a legacy here that we're going to hear about. And now Tim, he's a champion. He's a champion for employee ownership, speaking, writing, advocating for it so that more business owners like you are aware of the benefits. As a matter of fact, he's at the Ohio State House today talking to legislators about the benefits of ESOPs. And so, Tim, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us from the basement of the Ohio State House down there.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, excited to be here. This was not in the cards for me. I had no idea what I was getting into when I came here to start talking to legislators about employee ownership, and they would say, "Look, you need to go talk to this person, you need to go talk to that person, and you need to go talk to the Ohio Chamber, and you need to go talk to the Ohio Manufacturers Association." So I've been here now for 2 days. It was going to be a day, and yeah, I'm in the basement of the State House right now, trying to find a quiet place to be able to talk to you all about what's going on. So, yeah.
Well, fantastic. So you're in a talking mode. Hopefully,
Yeah.
you're not talked out. I don't think you are. So let's start with, before we get into some questions, Walter is going to tee us up with probably the second question. But the first question is, let's start with learning more about your business and
Sure.
your past role in the business
Yep.
and your current role. And so just give us a brief history. Let's start there.
Yeah, so you did a great job with the overall background. And my father started his company, a software company, in 1978 in Lebanon, Ohio, which it's unusual to start a software company in the 70s, so he was way ahead of his time. And B, to start it in Lebanon, Ohio, of all places, is also very unusual. It was a software company that wrote software for cities, counties, municipalities for their accounting systems. And because of that, there was a lot of concern around Y2K, if you remember the whole switching to a 4-digit year. He had a ton of stress making sure all their software was up to date before that flipped over from 1999 to 2000. And with that, he had a heart attack in 2001, primarily stress related, poor eating habits, too much work. And the doctor said, you got to somehow, reduce the stress in your life. And he said all the stress is coming from his company. So he chose to sell the company. At the time, I was the oldest of 5 kids. I was just over 30 years old. All my brothers and sisters in their 20s. None of us were of the age or experience that we could really take over his company, nor did we have necessarily the interest. He got a couple of offers to sell the company to a couple of strategic buyers, but none of it felt right to him because the jobs that he had created, the company had created in Lebanon, would get moved out of state. One company was in New York, the other one was actually in Toronto, so it would actually become a Canadian company writing software for cities in the U.S. So his broker knew that this didn't feel right to him. He got a couple of letter of intents. So his broker suggested that he look into employee ownership. And then he looked into that, felt like that was a much better option for him, for his legacy, for his employees. So he went down that path instead and was able to complete the transaction in 2004 and stepped down, transitioned it to his employees. He went on to become the deacon of the local Catholic church. He just celebrated his 80-year birthday this past year. And is still, he's working 7 days a week now because he works on Sundays. So he's still very, very active, which is great. So yeah, that's where he wound up. So I got to see that whole thing play out. I started my company in '92 in college, as you detailed there. Sold it, bought it back. I was running it when my father was looking to figure out what he wanted to do. So I was consumed by running my company. And I knew I wanted to do something different with it and saw how well things worked for him. So in 2012, I pivoted the company towards cybersecurity and the cloud. And then also at the same time told my employees, my goal with the company is for it to become employee owned by 2020, 30% employee owned minimum. So we put a plan together to do that, to grow the company, become more profitable, and have a better structure in place so it could become employee owned. Exceeded all the goals I had set out in 2018, 2 years ahead of time. 2019 became a 30% ESOP, a year ahead of schedule.
Nice.
Which was fantastic. And then continued to grow the company, did 4 additional acquisitions after that time. And then last year transitioned it to 100% employee owned. So that's 2025 was last year. And stepped down as CEO and now have a new CEO running the company. And I'm now removed myself from the company and focused pretty much on advocating for employee ownership, which is why I'm at the State House and have actually contracted a lobbyist for employee ownership. The first time that employee ownership has had a lobbyist in the state of Ohio since 1988. So we haven't had any pro employee ownership legislation since that time. So I'm trying to make some changes to make Ohio a friendlier place for employee-owned companies.
Wow, congratulations on all that, Tim.
Thanks.
Fantastic.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Really
Yeah.
impressive. Let me ask you a question. So, we always look at whether an ESOP makes sense for clients. And, frankly, a lot of times it doesn't.
Yeah.
So when, just some company owner off the street comes and asks you about an ESOP, I mean, what are kind of things that you look for right away that kind of tells you yes or no before you even bother digging in?
Yeah. So the number one thing is it needs to be at least 20 employees. So there's a lot of caveats around all this stuff. So if they want to do 100% employee owned, they need to be at least 30 employees, sometimes 50 employees, so that there's enough diversity among shareholders that they're not running into concentration of ownership issues. You can do a partial ESOP, like a 30% one with fewer employees, but you'd have to work on growing to be able to increase your ownership. And then profitability, the company has to be generating a consistent EBITDA year after year in order to be able to pay the bank note, the seller note that the company is going to undertake to be able to buy the company from the owner. If the company's not making any money, losing money, et cetera, it's not a fit at all for an ESOP. So you have to take that into account. And then in terms of the size of the company, if you're going to do a partial ESOP with a seller note, you can be like $500,000 EBITDA company. Makes sense, starts to make sense around $1 million EBITDA. Then you could look at doing 100%, probably would be difficult to get any bank financing at a $2 million or at a $1 million EBITDA. Once you get to $2 million EBITDA, that's when you start to entertain bank financing, being able to do a full 100% ESOP. And usually at that scale too, you have a good leadership team in place, and you've got a succession plan in place. So those are other boxes that need to be checked as well. And which is why in 2012, I wasn't big enough. I wasn't profitable enough. I didn't have a succession plan in place. I didn't have a leadership plan in place. So that's why I chose to tell my employees, this is my plan. Help me get there. Many companies choose not to tell their employees they want to become employee owned. They want to work on it behind the scenes and hope that they get there. I chose to engage my employees and use their engagement to scale the company to become employee owned. You always risk, it was a risk for me because maybe we wouldn't hit those goals, but I would have only had myself and my employees to blame if we didn't hit those goals. And there could have been PE money or strategic buyer that came along that, allowed me to sell. So there's always that concern. But because I communicated that to my employees, this is my goal, I didn't want to go back on my word in that fashion. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you mentioned, and it sounded like both you and your father, a real motivation was you have a passion for employees owning businesses. Because, my former career as a tax guy, I was often looking at the incredible ability to defer taxes on the sale of your company. I mean, is that when you talk to business owners, is that a big part of it, or is it more what you're feeling?
A lot of times it's 50-50. They're like, in some cases, it's even a bonus to them. Like, I'm really want to be able to turn this over to my employees, and it's great that I also get this tax benefit to be able to do that. So yes, and there are definitely ESOPs that I've met with that only did it for the tax purposes. They had zero engagement or interest. I wouldn't say zero, but they had very little interest in really empowering their employees. They were primarily doing it for the tax benefits. But yeah, that you bring up a good point. As a selling owner of a company, if you structure it properly, you can you can defer indefinitely capital gains tax on the sale of the company through an ESOP if you structure it properly. And then after you do that transaction, the company, when structured properly, becomes a non-taxable entity, which then allows it to repay the bank notes and the seller notes more quickly because it doesn't have to pay any yearly taxes, corporate taxes. And then after those bank notes or seller notes are paid off, then more of the money goes towards the employees' retirements and for growth of the company through acquisitions, which is why you're seeing now holding companies that are ESOP, that are employee owned, because they have this huge advantage over their competitors because they are not paying any corporate tax.
Right. Yeah. So, Tim, you did a partial. You did 30%. You mentioned size,
Yeah.
been a factor. Were there other factors that weighed into that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was doing 30% minimum. You have to do that to do the 1042 exchange, which is the way to defer capital gains. I had 2 kids in grade school that I thought they may be interested in taking over for me in the future. So I want to keep 70% of the company to be able to transition to them in the future. That wasn't the case, so I didn't have to worry about that later. Another reason is I wanted to be in control of the company. So as a minority ESOP, I didn't have to have a board I reported to. It was just like having a silent partner. And then also I didn't put too much debt on the company. So I was able to do those 4 additional acquisitions because I didn't have a huge debt burden that the company had to repay, only doing 30%. So those were the reasons I did that.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And then you mentioned growth plans as well. Can you speak to that a little bit as you look at companies that are considering it? How critical is that focus on growth?
So yeah, an ESOP has a yearly valuation that's done, and as part of that, they're looking forward about 5 years to see how the company is going to grow to set the stock price for the employees. So continuing to get the company to grow is going to increase that stock price. So it's a big component of growing the company. because the company is not paying corporate tax, that lines it up where it can do acquisitions more easily because it can buy a company that's currently paying corporate tax and then bring that revenue in and not pay corporate tax. But also, acquisition wise, it's a lot easier to go out and buy a company and engage those employees that are at that company to work for you because they know they now own part of the company or the whole company that they now work for. So you have less turnover after those acquisitions than you do with traditional private equity or strategic buying, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and along those lines, Tim, when you went to 100%, you did a partial at 30, and then a number of years later you went to 100. Couple of the parameters that we also bring up to owners who are considering an ESOP is in regard to growth.
Yeah.
You're going to want to see the revenues consistent and
Mhm.
consistently upward, hopefully.
Yeah. Yep.
Not a lot of long-term debt on the books already.
Yep.
And so just consistency in regard to revenue and profitability, because you're going to be taking on debt.
Yeah.
And so what would you say about that piece? When you went to 100%, you were confident we're going to continue to see upward trend in revenue, profitability, so on and so forth?
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm confident. Historically, we've seen our industry is growing. We're in cybersecurity. I mean, there is, as long as the company continues to execute as it has, the growth will continue. And then we also have acquisitions that the company is looking to do as well. So yeah, I'm sitting down with my leadership team and they are the ones that are putting together the growth plans based on historically what we've done and what we have in the pipeline and what our industry is doing. So we were very comfortable with the value of the company, valuation that came back, and the goals that they need to achieve going forward after I've stepped back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tim, you mentioned you brought on a CEO at some point in time. How did you incentivize someone to come into an ESOP where equity is not necessarily part of the play?
Well, everybody gets equity.
Right.
So yeah, so the my CEO that's stepped in for me, he actually founded Intrust IT in Chicago in the early 2000s, and I bought the company from him. That was one of the acquisitions I did. So my company in Cincinnati was originally called Land Solutions. I bought his company in 2008, 2009, somewhere around in there, and then took the name on because Land Solutions was a little dated, local area network. And he and I were partners then for about 3 years until I bought him out. And then he went off, did consulting, started a software company, a SaaS company that he grew and sold. And then he actually wound up working for another company in our industry in Chicago that wound up getting bought by private equity. And then he worked for a couple of years in that space with private equity backing the company. And he said it was the most soul-sucking 2 years of his life and absolutely hated every waking day that he went there, trying to motivate his employees to work for this company that was just there sucking all the, profits out of the company, and was hard to get motivated. So after he called me about that and said, because I had told him about employee ownership back when I bought him out. He's like, I don't really get it. And then after his experience in that private equity backed company, he contacted me. He's like, what's going on? I see the light. Can I come back? Not in those many words, but it was a longer conversation. So I wound up hiring him back into the company as the COO, Chief Operating Officer, about 4 years ago. And then, through further discussion, said, I think it makes sense for you to step into the CEO role. And he is all on board with employee ownership because he sees how much more engaged the employees are, how much less turnover there is. Everybody is willing to pitch in. It's a lot easier to get motivated. Everybody has skin in the game. And then, he has equity because he is it's broad-based employee ownership. There's also SARs, stock appreciation rights, that can be distributed out to the leadership team. There's other things that can be done to incentivize your leadership team, but you can't give them, set aside special stock or something like that in the ESOP for people in certain positions.
Right. Yep.
I
Yep.
think that is an interesting point, that your other incentive comp options are still available to you,
Yes.
because that's important for any growing company.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people think, well, you got the ESOP and that's it, but everything else is still open to you, especially all the different synthetic stock things like
Yeah.
appreciation
Yeah.
rights and stuff like that.
We have a profit sharing program, and the board in the future they can do other things as well, in terms of SARs or profit sharing or bonus program structures for the leadership team. But at this point, that's for the board to decide. I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, talk about the leadership. We just talked about the CEO some, but what about the other leaders on the leadership team, and how important it is to have a strong and capable next level type of leadership team for this?
Yeah, I talk about precursors sometimes to employee ownership, and the two big precursors, things you have to do before you look at becoming employee owned, is with your leadership team. We implemented EOS, Entrepreneurs Operating System, in 2000, 6 years ago. And that was a great way for me to structure my leadership team and to start moving the decisions and delegate that type of thing down, so I could focus on being the visionary for the company and have an integrator and a leadership team to run the company for me. So I had pretty much stepped back from the company, a couple of years ago as it was anyway. So EOS is definitely important, and I love that system as a way to delegate through your leadership team. And then the other precursor I like is open book management, great game of business. When I was getting ready to do my ESOP, and I asked my father, what's something you would have done different if you could before you became an ESOP? And he said, I would have gotten the employees visibility into the books way before we became an ESOP. He said, because he waited until the transaction and then started exposing finances to them. And since they hadn't been doing it for years and hadn't seen the cycles and hadn't had a bad month and all that kind of stuff, they were scared to death to make decisions. I started in 2014 implementing Great Game of Business. So now it's been 12 years running that. So my books have been completely open for over 10 years. I can't imagine running a business any other way, where everybody in the company knows the P&L, the balance sheet, what we're looking at, because it gives them comfort knowing the company's making money and that they're going to have a job tomorrow. And it also gives them knowledge to make changes that will affect and improve the finances of the company.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And you mentioned that you're where you are because you're seeking to influence legislation that would be favorable to employee ownership.
Yeah.
What does it actually look like? What type of restrictions or support is?
Well, we're starting really simple right now. So this is really weird. I didn't ever think I would do this, but I have contracted a lobbyist for me personally to help me with this, introduce people, what a lobbyist does, and help write legislation. But the simplest thing we're doing right now is in Ohio, we have the commercial activity tax, the CAT tax, which is a gross tax on revenue for companies in Ohio. We're one of only 5 states that have these types of taxes. And because of that, ESOPs pay that corporate tax in Ohio, whereas traditionally they don't pay it federally or in any other state. So there are 45 states in the US that are now better to have an employee-owned company in than in Ohio. So it would be good. And what we're working on is trying to convince the legislators to carve out or exclude 100% employee-owned companies, ESOPs, from having to pay that commercial activity tax. It represents about $40 million in tax receipts in the state of Ohio. It's about 1.6% of the CAT tax. So it's a small amount. It would be beneficial because that money would go directly towards the employees. It would go indirectly to all the employees, either by profits that would go right into their ESOP or retirement funds, or it would go to repaying the debt of the company quicker so that the company could then fund the retirement accounts of the employees more easily, or it would go to doing acquisitions and growing the company. Anyway, you cut it, it's going to benefit employees in Ohio versus a lot of other corporate tax cuts that occur. A lot of times wind up enriching people that own companies and they're maybe located in other states or even overseas in other countries, owning companies in Cincinnati or in Ohio that pay less tax. That just benefits those people external to Ohio. This is a really easy way to improve the retirement and the financial aspects of employee ownership in Ohio. So that's one we're starting with, something simple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Do you offhand know the other 4 states that are disadvantaged?
I don't. There are none of them around us. So Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky they don't have commercial activity tax. I don't know what the other states are and what their rates are and what their laws are. But a really good example of this is like Messer Construction in Cincinnati is the largest employee-owned company in Cincinnati. I think it's the largest one in Ohio, like 1.5 billion in revenue or something like that. They could just move their headquarters, across the river to Kentucky, and then they would cut out that commercial activity tax, and it would be beneficial to all the employees. So yeah, it would be a huge benefit.
All right. So in the last few minutes, Tim, when you've been at the State House there and you're the champion of ESOPs, what are some of your key talking points in being a champion for ESOPs when you're in that context that will benefit our listeners?
So Ohio right now is per capita as the most employee-owned companies of all the states. And we're number 3 in terms of just raw number of employee-owned companies. We're behind California and Texas, but size-wise that makes sense. So we're number 3. One of the reasons for that is there's the Ohio Employee Ownership Center out of Kent State, which has been around since about '88, and that's about a third of the ESOPs in Ohio were created because of that center. And my father's company is a good example of that. He used the resources at Kent State as a way to help him become employee owned. So Ohio has been a leader in employee ownership since the 80s, but we're losing our mojo. We're losing our edge because we've cut the funding to that center. As an example, it still exists, but it's kind of on a shoestring budget, doing it itself through sponsorship and membership. Colorado is putting a lot better legislation forward to improve employee ownership there. Michigan now is starting to do the same thing. They've started funding their own employee ownership center in Michigan and are looking at ways to make employee ownership easier to do in Michigan. So Ohio needs to get with the program and start catching up.
Okay. Tell us too, though, why you're such an advocate for employee ownership. What are the reasons that you're such a champion?
Well, obviously, it's hard to pretty much read any story these days without hearing about the income inequality or capital concentration that's occurring. And that's why ESOPs were created. Louis Kelso created ESOPs in the 50s because he saw that as automation improved, the value of labor would go down. The people that own the capital, that own the machines, would become richer and richer. And that's definitely what has occurred. And now with AI and automation, robots and everything, we're seeing that becoming even worse, where CEOs on average earn 300 times the average, frontline worker's salary. So employee ownership is the best way to provide some broad-based ownership, and it creates capitalists out of all the employees there. So you're not giving them a free ride. They're earning that capital ownership through the sweat of their brow, through working at their job, and getting them to understand how the capital system works. So I don't know of any system out there that's a better way to do that.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And a last question, Tim, is trends. Given that, boomers are starting to exit in larger quantities, et cetera, what are you seeing down the pike?
Yeah, so yeah, that is definitely a concern. There's a lot of concern about the fact of the silver tsunami, all of the retiring owners. So we're trying to figure out ways to make becoming employee-owned company easier or being acquired by an employee-owned company. So there's multiple ways that you can become employee-owned. You can obviously set up your own ESOP and do it that way, or you can find a ESOP company, employee-owned company or industry and sell to them. Or there are now these holding companies because ESOPs have been around long enough that they're starting to gain size. They're multi-billions of dollars in revenue in some cases. Holding companies to diversify now are starting to want to buy different companies that operate in different sectors, which is actually what I did with my company. This past year, instead of just giving all my employees stock and interest, I actually joined my company into a holding company, swapped the shares of my employees into the holding company. That's a 100% employee-owned company. So now my employees own shares across about a dozen different companies. It's still all employee-owned, and there's no external private equity or anything like that involved, but it diversifies their holdings. And as somebody in my company comes up with new AI initiative or solution, we can take that and then implement it across those 12 companies, and the stock value of all the employees goes up over time. So some diversification, some shared capabilities, economies of scale that can occur out of those holding companies.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Okay. So Tim, I'm going to ask you in a second if you want to share your contact information and if you want to promote something today. But before I do that, is there any last words of wisdom you would provide to any owner out there who's listening and who's considering an ESOP as an exit strategy?
Yeah, I mean
that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, the tax benefits are fantastic for you and for the company after you've exited it, which makes it easier for it to repay its seller note and its bank note. About half the time when I talk to entrepreneurs that exited their company via private equity, they're like, "This is the worst decision I ever made in my life," and they, are upset that they did it. 90% of the time, I talk to people that exited via an ESOP, and they said it was the best decision they've ever made in their life. So it's extremely rare. I've spoken to 2 people that have exited via ESOPs that wasn't a good experience for them, but they're definitely the outliers. Significant, like my father and others that I've spoken to, it's been a huge benefit in their life. So think about your legacy and what you want that to look like, and the fact that you can do it in pieces over time, which is what I did, which is one amazing part of ESOPs. If you are considering it, talk to other ESOP CEOs or exiting owners like myself. And in June, there's a event called "Is an ESOP Right for You" in Columbus, Ohio, here in Columbus, that is put on by the National Center for Employee Ownership. I helped champion to get that here in Ohio, so that anybody in Ohio can go to that. It's a day and a half long and learn about what it takes to become employee owned. There'll be accountants there, there'll be attorneys there, there'll be trustees there, there'll be bankers there, there'll be people that exited their company like me speaking, and that you can talk to. So go to one of those events and learn more.
Very neat.
Fantastic. If someone wants to contact you, how can they do that?
The best way is on LinkedIn. Just search for my name, Tim Rettig, Rettig, is the best way to get in touch with me, for sure.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us today, Tim, from the bowels of the State House in Ohio. We're really grateful that you would take the time. This has been hugely helpful. Listeners are going to benefit greatly from it. And listeners, if you need help in maximizing the value of your business, the sellability of it, planning for your exit, please contact us at ennislp.com. And thank you for listening. If you've benefited from today's episode, please consider liking it and sharing it on social media. We'd be very grateful for that. And until the next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Walter Dial with Corby McGordon signing off.